The rain started the exact moment he raised the crowbar. Drops hammered the roof. People screamed with joy and fell to their knees, while he stared at the numbers and understood. Every tear of their happiness was paid for with someone else's death. Because this rain isn't born, it's drained from the neighboring valley like blood from an open wound. Ethan Cole woke at 4:30 in the morning, a full hour before his alarm was set to go off. Sleep vanished instantly, as if his body understood there was no point fighting the inevitable. He lay on the narrow couch, buried under climatology textbooks, staring at the ceiling where the blue glow from his monitors cast ghostly patterns. His first thought was about the data. It was always about the data. He rose and walked barefoot across the cold linoleum to his workstation. 3 screens already glowed. He never turned them off. Electricity in Ashford was cheap. The town was dying, but the infrastructure still functioned, like the nervous system of a corpse that hadn't yet realized it was dead. Ethan reached for the old barometer hanging on the wall. His grandfather, a fishing boat captain, had trusted this instrument more than any computer. Ethan tapped his finger against the glass. The needle didn't budge. 758 millibars. Same reading as yesterday. And the day before. The high-pressure system sat over the region like a concrete slab over a grave. He settled into his chair, and it creaked under his weight. The central monitor refreshed with satellite images. Ethan zoomed in, though he knew what he'd see. A massive, motionless blob of high pressure blanketing the entire region. The edges were sharp, almost geometric. Nature rarely created such perfect symmetry. This anticyclone was an anomaly, but a natural one, born from the chaos of atmospheric currents. Ethan understood its mechanics. Warm air rises, cools, descends, creating a closed cycle of stability. The problem was, this stability was killing Ashford. He opened the humidity chart. The numbers were brutal. 7% relative humidity, dew point -4. The air was sucking moisture from everything, from the ground, from plants, from people. Ethan ran a hand across his face and felt how his skin had tightened. Even here, in the relative cool of his observatory, the air was dry as parchment. He switched to archived data, scrolling back through the months. 3 months without rain. 4 months before that with below normal precipitation. Wells had run dry. The Ashford River had become a chain of muddy puddles connected by threads of wet stone. Farmers were pumping the last water from deep wells, but it was only enough to keep livestock alive. The crops had burned back in July. Ethan opened the forecast file he'd compiled a week ago for the town council. He'd spent 6 hours analyzing circulation models, historical patterns, oceanic oscillation indices. His conclusion had been precise and merciless. The anticyclone would persist for at least 3 more weeks, possibly 6. Chance of significant precipitation, less than 2%. They'd listened to his report in complete silence. The mayor, an old man with a face like weathered granite, had sat staring at the table. When Ethan finished, there was a pause. Then the mayor said, "Thank you, Mr. Cole." Nothing more. No questions, no anger. Just the emptiness of people who'd heard a death sentence and accepted it. Ethan closed the file. Outside, dawn was breaking. He stood, walked to the window, and looked down at Ashford. The town sprawled below, small and pitiful in the pre-dawn haze. Main Street was empty. Shop windows, coated in dust, reflected gray light. On the door of the grocery store hung a for sale sign, nailed up 3 months ago. No buyers had come. He saw this view every day, and every day felt the same thing: powerlessness. He could diagnose the disease with absolute precision, but he had no cure. His knowledge was useless. Meteorology doesn't control weather, It only observes and makes predictions. Ethan was the most educated spectator of catastrophe. Ethan entered the data into his model, an algorithm he'd been developing for 5 years. The program processed the information and generated today's forecast. Clear skies, temperature reaching 104 degrees, wind westerly, light. Probability of precipitation, 0%. He saved the forecast to a file he'd later send to the National Weather Service. This was his job. He performed it every day with mechanical precision, even knowing that nobody needed it. His phone, an old Nokia, lay on the desk. No new messages on the screen. Ethan ran his finger over the worn plastic casing. A year ago, farmers had called him, asking about forecasts, hoping for miracles. Now nobody called. They'd stopped hoping, and with hope went their faith in his numbers. He checked the time. 5:40. 20 minutes until sunrise. Ethan stood, walked to the small kitchen, and splashed water on his face from the tap. The water was warm, pipes under the house heated from the ground. He looked at his reflection in the cloudy mirror above the sink. Gray eyes stared back, tired and cold. Dark circles beneath them had deepened over recent weeks. He looked older than his 38 years. Ethan returned to the monitors and opened the live feed from the camera pointed at the hill above town. An empty slope, covered in scorched grass. The hilltop was flat, as if someone had sliced it with a knife. From that vantage point, you could see all of Ashford. Once, Ethan had thought about installing an additional weather station there, but never got around to it. Now the hill was just another piece of dead earth. The sound of an engine made him lift his head. That was unusual. Cars rarely drove down Main Street this early. Ethan approached the window and looked out. A convoy was moving down the street. 2 large trucks, their beds covered with tarps concealing the cargo. Behind them, a black sedan, so clean and gleaming it looked like an alien spacecraft among the dusty ruins of Ashford. The vehicles moved slowly, carefully navigating potholes in the asphalt. Ethan frowned. The trucks stopped at the grocery store. A man stepped out of the sedan, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark jeans and a light shirt. Even from a distance, it was obvious his clothes were expensive. Quality. He moved confidently, with the ease of someone accustomed to attention. Thick, dark hair with gray at the temples was swept back. He looked around, and Ethan caught sight of his face. Tanned, with sharp features. Eyes hidden behind sunglasses, though the sun hadn't yet risen. The store doors opened, and the mayor emerged. Even from far away, you could see how he straightened at the sight of the stranger. They shook hands. The conversation was brief. The mayor nodded, then pointed toward the hill. The stranger looked that way, removed his sunglasses, and smiled. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. That smile was too confident, too bright for a town that was dying. People began emerging from houses. A few at first, then more. They gathered around the trucks, looking at the stranger with an expression Ethan hadn't seen in months. Curiosity mixed with hope. The stranger climbed the steps of the grocery store porch. It gave him elevation above the crowd. He raised his hand, calling for silence, and began to speak. Ethan couldn't hear the words from this distance, but he could see the townspeople's faces. They listened with bated breath. Old Henderson, a farmer who'd lost his entire apple crop, stood in the front row, clutching his worn baseball cap in gnarled hands. His lips were trembling. Ethan steps back from the window. He didn't want to see this. Whoever this man was, whatever he was saying, it couldn't be anything good. Desperate people were easy prey for anyone offering them hope. He sat back down at the monitors and tried to focus on the data. Satellite images, pressure charts, temperature tables, the cold, objective reality of numbers. This was his world, the only place where he felt in control. But the sound of engines pulled him from his concentration again. The trucks were moving. They were turning, heading toward the road that led up the hill. Ethan stood and returned to the window. Behind the trucks walked a crowd. 20 people, maybe more. They moved slowly, in procession, almost ritualistic. The black sedan brought up the rear. Ethan switched the camera to the hill and zoomed in. The trucks climbed the dusty road, leaving a cloud of gray dust in their wake. When they reached the summit, people began unloading something from the beds. Metal beams, spools of copper wire, strange constructions that looked like antennas. A generator. Ethan watched as the stranger directed the unloading. His crew, 3 men in work clothes, moved quickly and efficiently. Farmers helped them, hauling heavy components to the summit. Old Henderson dragged a metal beam alongside a younger guy. His face was red from exertion, but he was smiling. Ethan felt cold spreading through his body. He'd seen this before. Not here, not in Ashford, but on the news, in documentaries. Charlatans who came to dying towns with promises of miracles. Rain-making machines, vibrational generators, quantum resonators. They were all scams, pseudoscientific garbage wrapped in technical jargon for people who didn't understand the difference between correlation and causation. He returned to the computer and opened his browser. Typed into the search bar, rain-making machines, atmospheric generators, Ashford drought. The results were predictable. Articles about pseudoscientific con artists, exposés, lawsuits, not one working technology. Ethan closed the browser and looked at the camera feed. On the hill, a structure was rising. A metal skeleton, about 15 feet tall, with 4 supports and a central rod. Around the rod, coils of copper wire were being wound. At the top, a parabolic antenna was being installed. It looked impressive. It looked scientific. It looked like expensive props for a theater production. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. He needed to smoke. He pulled a crumpled pack of cigarettes from the desk drawer and a Zippo lighter. A gift from Danny, his partner, who'd died 15 years ago. Ethan hadn't worked in law enforcement, but the lighter had come to him from his father, who'd been Danny's friend. He flicked the lid. Flames sparked, and he lit up, drawing smoke deep into his lungs. He shouldn't interfere. This wasn't his business. If people wanted to believe in miracles, that was their choice. He wasn't a cop, not a priest, not a moral authority. He was a meteorologist, and his job was to observe weather, not human foolishness. But something inside him, cold and stubborn, couldn't let the thought go. These people were his neighbors. They were suffering, and someone had come to exploit their suffering. Ethan stubbed out the cigarette and returned to the monitor. The camera showed the stranger's crew connecting thick cables to the generator. One of the men checked connections with a multimeter. The stranger stood off to the side, hands in pockets, watching. His face was calm. Construction continued all day. Ethan didn't leave the monitor. He skipped breakfast, forgot about lunch. Coffee went cold in the mug, but he took mechanical sips without taking his eyes from the screen. By evening, the structure was complete. It towered on the hilltop, crude and functional. Floodlights were installed around it, powered by the humming generator. The stranger stood next to the control panel, a metal box the size of a refrigerator, covered with switches and indicators. The crowd at the base of the hill had grown. Ethan estimated the number, 100 people, nearly half of Ashford's population. They stood in the twilight, faces illuminated by floodlight. The stranger raised his hand, calling for silence. Ethan turned on the camera's audio. The microphone was poor quality, but the words were distinguishable. "My friends." The stranger's voice was deep, soothing, almost hypnotic. "You have suffered too long. Your land was dying. Your children cried from thirst. But today, that ends." The crowd was silent. The tension was physically palpable. "This machine," he placed his hand on the control panel, "is not magic. It's science. Pure, precise science. It calibrates atmospheric resonance frequencies, creating harmonic oscillations that attract moisture. We don't pray for rain. We politely ask it to come, using the language the atmosphere understands, the language of pressure and temperature." Ethan snorted. Atmospheric resonance frequencies. It was scientific garbage, terms that sounded impressive to the uninitiated but meant nothing to anyone who'd studied atmospheric physics. The stranger continued. "I'm Dr. Marcus Vale. I've dedicated my life to this technology, and today I want to share it with you, free of charge, because I believe every person deserves rain." The crowd stirred. Whispers ran through the ranks. Vale smiled. "Now let me show you what's possible." He turned to the panel and placed his hand on a large red button. A pause. Theatrical, calculated. Then he pressed it. The generator roared to life. The machine awakened with a deep, low-frequency hum that, even through the camera speakers, made Ethan feel vibration in his chest. The floodlights flickered, then steadied, bathing the hill in blue light. The copper coils began to glow. Around the parabolic antenna, a faint luminescence appeared, like an aura. The air smelled of ozone. Ethan sensed it even through the screen, imagining the scent he knew must be there. The crowd froze. Vale stood with arms spread wide, face turned toward the sky. 1 minute passed. 2. 3. Ethan watched the meteorological data screen. Atmospheric pressure wasn't changing. Humidity wasn't rising. Temperature remained stable. Nothing was happening. This was a farce. He was about to turn off the camera when he heard a sound. Quiet, barely distinguishable. The sound of rain. Ethan froze. He looked at the camera screen. On the hill, in the floodlight, drops were falling. Sparse at first, then more frequent. Water. Real water, gleaming in the blue light. The crowd erupted. People screamed, cried, embraced. Old Henderson dropped to his knees in mud that seconds ago had been dust, and sobbed, covering his face with his hands. Ethan stared at the screen and felt his reality cracking at the seams. This was impossible. But it was happening. Ethan hadn't slept for 3 nights straight. Sleep had become a luxury he could no longer afford. Instead, he sat before the monitors, staring at screens until his eyes burned and the numbers blurred into meaningless lines. Coffee went cold in his mug. Empty energy drink cans were stacked in a pyramid in the corner. His house had changed over these 3 days. The walls were now covered with geological maps of the valley. In red marker, he'd circled the watershed boundary. In blue, the beds of dried-up streams. In green, zones of increased humidity after the resonator's activation. The lines intersected, forming a chaotic pattern that made sense only to Ethan. On the desk lay printouts of electricity bills for the entire county over the past 2 weeks. He'd obtained them by calling an acquaintance at the power company, lying about needing to update the regional database. The energy consumption graph was unambiguous. Every time the resonator activated, a spike occurred on the hill, 3 megawatts per hour, enough to light half of Ashford. But the town didn't see light. The town saw rain. Ethan ran a hand across his face. His skin was dry, stubble rough. He hadn't shaved since that evening when he first saw drops falling on the hill. The ritual that used to help order his thoughts now seemed pointless. Chaos had defeated order. He stood and walked to the map on the wall. Riverbend Valley, 30 miles west beyond a low ridge. He drew a circle around the town of Ashford, 3-mile radius. Then a second circle over Riverbend, the same size. 2 bubbles in the atmosphere, one filling with moisture, the other drying out. The correlation was perfect. Too perfect to be coincidence. He returned to the computer and opened archived data from the Riverbend weather station. Relative humidity, 3%. Daytime temperature, 108 degrees. Dew point, -13. The numbers screamed catastrophe, but nobody was listening. Nobody wanted to listen. The phone vibrated on the desk. Ethan looked at the screen. Mom. He declined the call. She called every week, same time, asked the same questions. How's the weather? How's work? Are you eating properly? He couldn't have that conversation now. Couldn't pretend his world wasn't collapsing. A knock at the door made him flinch. He froze, staring at the door. The knock repeated, more insistent. Ethan approached the door and opened it on the chain. On the doorstep stood Tom Jenkins, owner of the grocery store. Short, stocky, with a face covered in a web of broken capillaries. They'd been neighbors for 20 years, drank beer together on the porch on Thursdays, talked about weather, crops, baseball. Tom looked at Ethan without a smile. Hey, Ethan. Tom. A pause. Heavy. Awkward. Listen. Tom shifted from foot to foot. You need to stop. Stop what? Spreading this garbage about Dr. Vale. People are getting upset. My wife got upset. She was crying yesterday when she heard what you're saying. Ethan felt his fingers tighten on the door handle. I'm not spreading garbage. I'm stating facts. What facts, Ethan? Tom's voice hardened. That the machine doesn't work? Rain is falling. I saw it with my own eyes. My lawn is green for the first time in a year. That's a fact. Rain is falling here, but it's disappearing somewhere else. Riverbend is drying out. Vale isn't creating moisture. He's redistributing it. Tom shook his head. You hear yourself? Redistributing. Like he's some weather god. That's crazy, Ethan. Look, I get it. You're a scientist. It's hard for you to accept what you can't explain. But sometimes it's better to just let go. Let people be happy. They won't be happy when they learn the truth. And they won't. Tom said this quietly, almost wearily. Because they won't want to. You understand? They don't care about your truth. They want to live. Just leave them alone. Tom turned and walked down the path to the gate. Ethan watched him go. On the fence hung a new sign, painted bright yellow. Thank you, Dr. Vale, for the rain. Ethan slammed the door. Sheriff Thompson's office smelled of old paper and cold coffee. Ethan sat across from the massive oak desk, on which lay his folder of evidence. Printouts, charts, maps, 30 pages of irrefutable data. Sheriff Thompson flipped through the first 3 pages, then set the folder aside. He leaned back in his chair and looked at Ethan over his glasses. Ethan, his voice was level, almost monotone. I appreciate your concern. I really do. But I don't see a crime here. You don't see a crime? Ethan leaned forward. Vale is deliberately manipulating weather, creating drought in one region to produce rain in another. That's an environmental crime. That's your theory. Thompson folded his arms across his chest. Do you have proof he's doing this intentionally? Witness testimony? A confession? I have data. Data isn't law. I need facts, specific violations. Specific violations? Ethan heard his voice rising and tried to rein himself in. Fine. Illegal operation of a device affecting the environment without proper permits. Damage to the ecosystem of a neighboring county. Fraud, if you consider he's promising people something he can't control. Thompson sighed. Ethan, listen to me carefully. Dr. Vale came to Ashford at the mayor's invitation. His machine was approved by the town council. He's not taking money, not demanding payment. Rain is falling. People are happy. Where's the crime in that? People don't understand the consequences. Then explain it to them, Thompson shrugged. But don't come to me with this. I don't have the resources or grounds to investigate a man who's saving the town. Ethan stared at him for a long moment. There was no hostility in the sheriff's eyes, just exhaustion. Thompson didn't believe in the resonator, but he wasn't going to fight it either. So you're just going to look the other way? I'm going to do my job. Thompson said this with finality, and my job is to keep order in Ashford. And right now there's order here. For the first time in a year. Don't make me destroy it. Ethan stood, taking the folder from the desk. When Riverbend turns into a desert, remember this conversation. If that happens, Thompson replied calmly, it'll be their sheriff's problem, not mine. That evening, Ethan went out onto Main Street. He needed to buy batteries for his flashlight. He was planning another nighttime trip to the resonator. The street had changed. String lights hung in shop windows, though the Harvest Festival was still 3 weeks away. People sat on benches, talking, laughing. Kids ran along the sidewalk, their shouts carrying through the warm evening air. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, a scent Ethan hadn't experienced in months. He walked down the street, and conversations quieted. Heads turned, eyes followed him, cold and assessing. Outside the grocery store, a small group had gathered. 5 people, 6. Farmers Ethan had known since childhood. They were talking about fall plans, new crops, hope. He passed by them, and one of the men, Jack Rollins, said loudly, "Some people are never satisfied. Not even a miracle is enough." Chuckles, approving nods. Ethan stopped, turned to them. Do you understand what's happening? Vale isn't performing miracles. He's pumping moisture from Riverbend Valley. They're dying of drought there while you water your lawns. Riverbend's not our concern. Rollins crossed his arms over his chest. We take care of our own. Today, Riverbend. Tomorrow, us. This technology is unstable. When it spins out of control. When? A woman interrupted him, Mary Connors. You're always talking about what might happen, but Dr. Vale is doing what's already happening. Rain is falling. My daughter is smiling for the first time in months. That's reality, Ethan, not your charts. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. They were looking at him with an expression worse than anger. Pity. They pitied him. Poor Ethan Cole, who couldn't accept happiness. He turned and walked on. Behind him, someone said, Maybe Dr. Vale can help him. Maybe the machine can cure stubbornness, too. Laughter. Not malicious, but mocking. Ethan quickened his pace. The night was moonless, perfect for what he'd planned. Ethan moved along the hillside, staying in shadow. In his backpack, tools clinked. Screwdrivers, pliers, a multimeter. He wasn't a burglar, but his knowledge of electronics should be enough to crack open any service panel. The resonator hummed. A deep, low-frequency sound that Ethan felt in his bones. Floodlights bathed the machine in blue light, but beyond their circle was darkness. He waited until his eyes adjusted to the dark, then moved toward the base of the structure. The metal was warm to the touch. Vibration passed through the steel, making his fingers go numb. Ethan circled the frame, feeling the surface. Most of the housing was solid, welded from thick plates, but on the north side, hidden from the main trail, he found a seam. He pulled out his flashlight and illuminated the discovery. The panel was the size of a cabinet door, mounted flush with the housing. The metal was different. Not ordinary steel, but something darker, matte. No factory markings, just a lock. Ethan crouched, examining the mechanism. This wasn't a standard industrial lock. A combination dial. 6 digits. 10,000 possibilities. He ran his fingers over the cold metal of the lock. Why hide a service panel behind a combination lock? What was inside? He tried standard combinations. 0000000, 1 2 3 4 5 6. The lock didn't budge. Ethan pulled a stethoscope from his backpack, a tool he used for diagnosing equipment malfunctions at the weather station. He pressed the diaphragm to the lock housing and began slowly turning the dial, listening. A snap somewhere behind him made him freeze. He switched off the flashlight and crouched, pressing against the machine's housing. His heart pounded. His breathing was loud in his own ears. Silence. Only the hum of the resonator. Wind? Or was someone watching? Ethan slowly turned his head, peering into the darkness. Nothing. Emptiness. Paranoia. Just paranoia. He returned to the lock, but his hands were shaking. The stethoscope slipped from his fingers and fell to the ground with a dull thud. Damn. He bent to retrieve the instrument, and in that moment heard a voice. "What are you doing, son?" Ethan straightened so abruptly he slammed his shoulder into the metal frame. Pain shot through his arm. A figure emerged from the shadow. Old Farmer Henderson. In his hands was a wrench, large and heavy. The floodlight beam fell across his face from the side, making the deep wrinkles look like cracks in parched earth. "Mr. Henderson," Ethan raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I didn't mean to startle you." "You're not startling me." The old man's voice was raspy but firm. "You're trying to destroy our salvation." "I'm trying to understand how this machine works." "Why?" Henderson took a step forward, gripping the wrench. "Why do you need to? It works. Rain is falling. My land is coming back to life. Isn't that enough?" "No." Ethan lowered his hands. "Because the price of this rain is someone else's drought. Vale isn't creating water. He's stealing it." "Stealing from who? From the sky?" Henderson snorted. "The sky doesn't own rain, Ethan. God sends it to whoever he chooses. And he chose us. Through Dr. Vale. It's not God, it's physics. And it's killing Riverbend Valley." "I don't give a damn about Riverbend," the old man's voice rose, echoing along the slope. "I lost my whole crop. My apple trees were dying. My wife cried every night because we couldn't pay our bills. And now we have a chance. Our first chance in a year. And you want to take it away?" Ethan saw the old man's hands shaking. Not from weakness, from fear. "I don't want to take your chance away. I want it to be real." "It is real!" Henderson took another step. The wrench lifted. "I see it. I feel it. The ground is drinking water. Leaves are turning green. That's as real as your lack of faith." "Mr. Henderson, please." The old man swung. The motion was slow, telegraphed. Ethan easily leaned aside. The wrench whistled past, momentum throwing Henderson off balance. Ethan grabbed his shoulders, turned him, and shoved. Not hard, but enough to send the old man stumbling to the ground. The wrench clanged and skittered off into the dark. Henderson sat in the dirt, breathing hard. He looked up at Ethan, and in his eyes there was no anger. There was terror. "You're not taking this from us," he whispered. "We won't let you." Ethan stood over him and suddenly felt a wave of disgust at himself. He had just pushed a 70-year-old man, a man who wasn't defending a machine, but his last shred of hope. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "I didn't mean—" "Go." Henderson shut his eyes. His lips began to move, forming silent words. A prayer. "Go before I call the others. Go, heretic." Ethan stepped back. Then he turned and walked down the slope, leaving the old man praying to the humming machine. Morning began with an announcement. Ethan heard it on the radio as he brewed another mug of coffee. The host spoke in an excited tone, like he was announcing victory in a war. Dr. Marcus Vale has declared a great blessed downpour in honor of the Harvest Festival. The event will take place in 3 weeks on the first Saturday of October. Residents are invited to gather on the town square to witness this historic moment. Dr. Vale promises that the rain will surpass all previous sessions and become a symbol of Ashford's rebirth. Ethan switched off the radio. Great blessed downpour. Pretty words for an environmental disaster. He went back to the computer and opened his climate model. Entered parameters: 6-hour duration, rainfall intensity 2 inches per hour. The program processed the data and produced the result. To create that kind of storm, the system would have to strip an enormous volume of moisture from the atmosphere. The radius of impact would expand to 50 miles. The entire Riverbend Valley would fall into a zone of absolute desiccation. Ethan scrolled through the output. The model showed a cascading effect, relative humidity dropping to 0, vegetation starting to wither within hours, creeks drying up, forests turning into a powder keg, ready to ignite from the smallest spark. In a month, Riverbend Valley would be a dead zone. In a year, a desert. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. Vale was about to sacrifice an entire valley for one celebration. And no one but Ethan understood it. He looked at his phone. He could call the Federal Environmental Agency, file an official complaint, but that would take weeks. Bureaucracy, inspections, committees. He didn't have weeks. He could drive to Riverbend and warn them in person. But what would he say? That an invisible machine 30 miles away was stealing their rain? They wouldn't believe him. Just like Ashford hadn't. Ethan rubbed his face with both hands. His stubble was harsh, prickly. He glanced at the mirror above the sink and saw a stranger. Sunken eyes, pale skin. A man who no longer slept, ate, or lived, only collected evidence no one wanted. He went back to the map on the wall. Ashford, Riverbend. 2 points tied together by an invisible thread of guilt. The phone vibrated again. Mom, 3rd call of the day. Ethan answered. "Hey, Mom." "Ethan, finally! I was worried. You're not picking up." "Sorry, work's been crazy." "How's the weather?" She asked it every time, a ritual tribute to his profession. "Weird," he said, glancing at the catastrophe model on the screen. "Very weird." "You don't sound okay. Your voice is tired." "I'm fine." "Ethan." There was a note of concern in her voice now. "Are you sure? Maybe you should take some time off. Come out here to Astoria. Rain, the ocean. Remember how you loved watching storms from the pier?" Rain, the ocean. Forces of nature no one could control or steal. A world where physics still worked the way it was supposed to. "I remember," Ethan said, "but I can't right now. Something important is happening here." "Something that?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe." A pause. He could hear her breathing. "Be careful, honey. Please." "I will." He hung up and looked at the calendar. 3 weeks until the great blessed downpour. 3 weeks until disaster. He didn't have time to persuade people, didn't have time to wait for the system to respond. Ethan opened a desk drawer and took out a notebook. He started outlining a plan. Not a plan of persuasion, a plan of action. If no one stopped Vale, he'd have to do it himself. Ethan sat in front of the monitors, staring at the catastrophe model. The red zone spread across the map of Riverbend Valley like a blood stain on white fabric. Cascading effect, total desiccation, ecological collapse. He glanced at the calendar. 2 weeks and 4 days until the great, blessed downpour. Words no longer worked. The sheriff refused to listen. The townspeople had turned away. Federal agencies would drown in paperwork for months. Ethan didn't have months. The valley didn't have months. There was only one option left. He stood and walked to the closet in the corner, opened the door. Inside lay an old canvas field bag he used for equipment, heavy with reinforced seams. He pulled it out and set it on the table beside the keyboard. Methodically, without haste, he began to gather tools. A crowbar, steel 16 inches long with a split end, weighed about 2 pounds, enough to pry off any service panel. Industrial bolt cutters, hardened steel jaws capable of slicing through a cable as thick as a finger. He tested the action. It moved smoothly. A coil of copper wire, 50 feet, thick enough to carry a serious load. For creating a short in the electrical system, a flashlight, spare batteries. He stopped, looking at the contents of the bag. This wasn't a researcher's kit. It was a saboteur's. Ethan closed his eyes, took a deep breath. When he opened them, the decision was made. He took the folder of evidence, printouts, charts, maps, and placed it on top of the tools. These pages were no longer instruments of persuasion. They were his justification, proof that he was acting not out of spite or madness, but necessity. He zipped the bag closed and slung the strap over his shoulder. The weight was solid, undeniable. Roughly 20 pounds of metal and paper. He checked the time. 10:30 p.m. The resonator was running. Ethan could see the blue glow on the hill through the window. Nighttime irrigation session. Perfect timing. Ethan left the house and locked the door behind him. The key turned in the lock with a final click. Main Street was lit by strings of bulbs stretched between lampposts. Yellow light reflected in puddles on the sidewalk, the trace of a recent rain. Whether natural or resonator-made, Ethan could no longer say. People sat on their front porches, talked, laughed. The air held a mood he hadn't felt since childhood, an undercurrent of anticipation. He walked quickly, head held straight. The bag thumped against his hip with every step. Near the grocery store, a group of men were unloading boxes of decorations, paper flags, garlands, wooden arches. One of them, Mike Dennis, who owned the local auto shop, looked up and spotted Ethan. "Hey, Cole," he called. "You coming to the Harvest Festival? We're decorating the square. Could use a hand." Ethan stopped, looked at Mike. They'd gone to high school together, played on the same baseball team. "No," Ethan said. "I've got things to do." "Shame," Mike shrugged. His smile faded. "You know, Ethan, people say you're not too happy about the rain. That true?" Ethan felt the other men turn toward him. Expectation thickened the air. "I'm glad it's raining," he said carefully. "But I'm worried about the price." "What price?" Mike frowned. "Dr. Vale's not asking for anything. He's helping us, for free." "Not money." Ethan gripped the bag strap tighter. "Environmental. What he's doing has consequences." "Consequences," someone in the group repeated with a smirk. "Always your consequences, Cole." Mike raised a hand to calm them. "Look, Ethan, I get it. You're a scientist. You think about complicated stuff. But sometimes it's better to just accept the gift. My son asked to go play in the yard for the first time in 6 months. The grass is green. The air doesn't burn our lungs. That's good. Isn't that enough? Ethan looked at Mike. There was no malice in his eyes, only the fatigue of a man who'd suffered too long and now wanted nothing but peace. I hope it's enough, Ethan said quietly. He walked on. Behind him, the conversation resumed, but softer, more cautious. Farther down, near the fountain on the square, Ethan saw children, 8, maybe 9 of them. They were running around a garden sprinkler set up on the grass. Water fanned into the air, droplets glittering in the string lights. The kids shrieked with joy, darting into the spray and leaping back out, soaked and ecstatic. Ethan slowed, stopped. One of the girls, maybe 7, with braids, ran up to him. "Mr. Cole!" she shouted. "Look how much water! Mom said we couldn't play like this before because there wasn't enough. But now we can!" She grabbed his hand and tugged him toward the sprinkler. "Come with us!" Ethan knelt so he was level with her. The bag slipped off his shoulder and thudded onto the grass. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emma," she grinned, showing a missing front tooth. "Emma," he repeated. "You like the rain?" "I love it," she nodded so hard her braids bounced. "Now we're going to have a festival, and Dr. Vale's going to make a big, big storm, and all the trees will turn green." Ethan studied her face. The unfiltered joy of a child who didn't understand how complicated the world really was. "That's good," he said. "Are you coming to the festival?" Emma asked. "There's going to be cake." "I don't know." Ethan stood, lifting the bag. "Maybe." Emma ran back to the sprinkler. Ethan watched her jump through the arcs of water, carefree and alive. He walked on, but each step grew heavier. At the base of the hill, a truck was parked, Henderson's old pickup. Ethan recognized it by the rusted fender and the faded "Support Local Farmers" sticker on the rear window. But Henderson wasn't guarding the hill alone. Ethan stopped in the shadow of the trees, watching. There were 5 of them, young men, solid, in work clothes. 2 stood at the foot of the path leading to the top. 2 more patrolled the perimeter, walking slow circuits around the hill. The 5th sat on a folding chair near the truck, holding a radio. The security was organized, professional. Ethan crouched behind a tree trunk, pulled a pair of binoculars from the bag, and raised them. The men were armed. Not with guns, but with batons, flashlights, radios. They spoke in short bursts, coordinating movements. Someone had trained them. Forcing his way through was impossible. Ethan lowered the binoculars, looked up at the hill. The resonator hummed, its blue glare staining the night sky. He had to get up there, at any cost. He circled the hill, staying in the dark. The western slope was steeper, covered in scrub, harder to climb, but less guarded. He stopped beside a power junction box. A gray metal cabinet the size of a suitcase, bolted to a wooden pole. Thick cables ran from it to the floodlights around the resonator. Ethan pulled out the bolt cutters and the coil of wire. He opened the panel. Inside, terminals, fuses, bundles of wires. He wasn't an electrician, but he understood the basics. He needed an overload, a short. His fingers trembled as he stripped the ends of the copper wire. He clipped one end to a live line, the other to neutral. A bright, vicious spark flared in the dark. A loud crack shattered the silence. The smell of burnt insulation filled the air. The floodlights went out. The hill plunged into darkness. The guards' voices erupted in panic. Beams from flashlights whipped around erratically. "What happened? Lights are down. Check the box!" Ethan bolted up the slope, grabbing at bushes for balance. Branches slapped his face. Rocks slid under his boots. A flashlight beam crossed the trees to his left. Close. Too close. Someone's up there! Footsteps pounded behind him, heavy, fast. Ethan burst into the open clearing. The control trailer was 50 yards away, metal, its windows glowing from within. A figure blocked his path. One of the guards, a young guy gripping a baton. "Stop!" Ethan didn't slow. He lowered his shoulder and slammed into the guard with his full weight. The impact knocked the wind from both of them. They hit the ground, rolling in the dust. The guard was stronger, younger. His hand clamped Ethan's throat, squeezing. Ethan groped for a rock on the ground. Fist-sized. He struck the guard's temple. Not hard, but enough to loosen the grip. He broke free, scrambled to his feet, and ran for the trailer. The baton whistled past his head, missing by an inch. The control room door was unlocked. Ethan flung it open and charged inside. The air smelled of stale coffee, sweat, and ozone. The cramped space was crammed with equipment. Monitors, control panels, cables snaking across the floor like the guts of some electronic beast. Marcus Vale stood at the desk. He didn't turn when Ethan entered, just kept staring at the screen, lit by the sickly glow of data. Ethan approached the desk. The bag slipped from his shoulder. He opened it, pulled out the folder of evidence, and hurled it onto the control panel. Papers scattered, covering keyboard, mouse, indicators, humidity charts, valley maps, energy consumption calculations. "Game's over, Vale." Ethan's voice was hoarse from running and adrenaline. "I know everything. Your scam is exposed. Shut this machine down before it destroys the whole valley." Vale slowly raised his head, looked at Ethan. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger, just exhaustion. Deep, mortal, absolute. He didn't look like a caught criminal. He looked like a man carrying an unbearable burden. "You don't understand anything," Vale said quietly. "I understand enough," Ethan jabbed at the papers. "Riverbend is drying up. You're stealing their rain, pumping moisture into Ashford. Your great downpour will obliterate the valley's ecosystem. It's an environmental crime." Vale didn't respond. He turned to one monitor, the large central one, and with a few keystrokes changed the image. "Look," he said. Ethan stepped closer, peering at the screen. A satellite weather map, high resolution, color-coded for pressure and temperature. Over Riverbend Valley spun a monster. A hurricane. Ethan froze. His brain refused to process the image. The spiral structure was perfect. The eye, a dark spot at the center. Around it, cloud bands in ominous red and black, marking extreme pressure and wind speeds. Numbers at the screen's bottom. Diameter, 150 miles. Central wind speed, 175 miles per hour. Category, 5. Projected path, Riverbend Valley, then Ashford. "I'm not stealing their rain, you idiot." Vale's voice was quiet but laced with steel. "I'm stealing their hurricane." Ethan couldn't tear his eyes from the screen. This is impossible. Hurricanes don't form over land. They need ocean, warm water. This one doesn't need an ocean. Vale pointed to another monitor showing temperature and humidity graphs. It's an anomaly, a unique convergence of atmospheric conditions. Warm front from the south met a cold front from the north right over the mountain ridge. Moisture trapped in the valley for 3 months. The perfect storm. It's been forming for 3 months. 3 months, Ethan repeated. That's when I came here. Vale turned to him. My model predicted this 6 months ago. I tried warning NOAA, FEMA. They wouldn't listen. Said my theory was radical, unproven. Bureaucracy, committees. By the time they believed me, the hurricane would have killed thousands. Ethan sank slowly onto a chair. His legs wouldn't hold him. The resonator. A safety valve, Vale nodded. I'm bleeding off the hurricane's energy in small, controlled doses, redistributing moisture, lowering pressure in the storm's core. Every irrigation session in Ashford is a tiny piece of hurricane I'm pulling from Riverbend. Without it, the storm reaches full strength in 2 weeks and wipes both towns off the map.
Ethan looked at his bag, at the crowbar lying atop wire and cutters, tools of destruction. He'd come here to break the machine, disable the resonator, stop the crime. Instead, he'd nearly become a mass murderer. Why didn't you tell people? Ethan's voice was dull. Why the lie about rain? Because the truth would cause panic. Vale rubbed his face wearily. If I tell them a Category 5 hurricane is forming overhead, they'll run. Evacuation, chaos. And while they're running, the hurricane gains strength because the resonator stops. They'll die on the roads. And the great blessed downpour? The final pressure release. Vale pointed to a chart. After that, the storm core disintegrates completely. The hurricane dies. But I need people to stay here, safe, while I work. So I gave them a miracle instead of catastrophe. Hope instead of fear. Ethan stared at the hurricane screen. The monster invisible to the town below. A deadly threat disguised as blessing. Riverbend, he whispered. They're drying out. They'll survive, Vale said firmly. Drought is better than a hurricane. I chose the lesser evil. Who gave you the right to choose? No one, Vale met his eyes. But someone had to. The system failed. Bureaucrats wouldn't listen. I was all that was left. Silence filled the trailer. Outside, guards' voices searched for the intruder. Ethan looked at his hands. They trembled. All his struggle. All the evidence. Righteous anger. Built on a mistake. He wasn't the hero. He was the fanatic who'd nearly killed thousands for abstract truth. What now? Ethan asked. Vale turned back to the monitors. Now you leave and stay silent. Or stay and help me save these people. Your choice. Ethan stood slowly, picked up the bag. The crowbar clinked inside, mocking the intent that had nearly become crime. He looked at the hurricane screen, at Vale, at his shaking hands. Choice. Truth or lives. His crusade had collapsed, but people still needed saving, just not by him anymore. Ethan stared at the screen, the world vanishing. Not crumbling, not cracking, simply ceasing to exist, as if it had never been. The hurricane's spiral rotated on the monitor with hypnotic precision. Red and black cloud bands twisted around the dark eye at center. The mathematical model was flawless. Too flawless to be faked. Ethan had seen such models hundreds of times in his career. He knew how to distinguish simulation from real satellite data, knew the distortions from improper processing, the artifacts from manipulation. There were none here. Just pure, merciless data. Diameter, 150 miles. Wind speed, 175 miles per hour. Category, 5. His hands gripped the desk edge, knuckles whitened. Impossible. His voice was alien, hollow. Hurricanes don't form over land. This one did. Vale hit a key, image shifting to atmospheric temperature profiles. See? Warm front from south, cold from north. Collision right over the ridge. Moisture trapped 3 months. Perfect storm. Ethan's gaze flicked to another monitor. Archived satellite data for 6 months. Frame-by-frame animation showed a tiny low-pressure area over Riverbend slowly, inexorably growing. Sucking moisture from surroundings. Densifying. Gaining power. His brain automatically crunched numbers. Calculated system energy. Verified data consistency. It all matched. Damn it, it all matched. I tried warning NOAA. Vale spoke fast, clipped. 6 months back. Showed them the model. They called my theory radical, unproven, asked for more studies, committees, bureaucracy. By the time they'd believe, "Time to impact?" Ethan cut in. Vale paused, glanced at the central monitor. "Current trajectory? 12 days. If I keep bleeding pressure, 18. 20 if lucky." "And the great downpour?" "Final dump," Vale rubbed his face. "Full power. 6 hours continuous. After, hurricane core should shred completely. System dissipates." Ethan stepped back from the desk. His foot caught the tool bag. Crowbar clinked inside. Mocking reminder of intent that nearly became mass murder. He'd come to stop a criminal. Instead, nearly became one. "Why not tell people the truth?" Ethan asked. "About a Category 5 forming overhead?" Vale laughed shortly, broken. "Picture the reaction. Panic. Exodus. They'll run. While they run, hurricane powers up, resonator offline. They'll die in traffic, cars, motels, hundreds, thousands. I gave them miracle over catastrophe, hope over fear, survival chance." Ethan eyed the screen, the spinning beast unseen by the town below. His crusade. Months investigating, righteous fury. Built on error. Worse, incomplete data. Deadliest sin of a scientist. He sank into the chair. Legs failed. "Now what?" Voice barely audible. Vale faced monitors. "You leave. Or stay. Help. Your call." Silence flooded the trailer. Guards' voices outside hunted the intruder. Ethan studied his hands, trembling. His gaze drifted screens, avoiding the hurricane's core. Skimmed data columns on side displays, telemetry, humidity at altitudes, temperature gradients. Professional instinct. Years reading atmosphere like books. Humidity graph, 3 lines for levels: surface, mid-troposphere, upper. Ethan frowned. Lines weren't synchronous. Upper fluctuations led mid by 3 to 4 minutes. Mid led surface by 5. Normal for natural systems, not controlled ones. He stood, approached monitor, zoomed last 24 hours. Resonator fired 6 times, 6 irrigations, 6 points where lines should sync if Vale truly controlled. They didn't. Upper dropped first, mid 3 to 4 minutes later, surface 5 after. Asynchrony. Ethan pulled secondary data. Pressure at hurricane core. Should rise steady between sessions, drop during. Graph showed different. Pressure didn't drop. It oscillated. Up-down spikes growing amplitude. Resonance. Damn it. "Show me the resonator's energy pulse parameters," Ethan said. Vale turned. "What?" "Frequency, amplitude, pulse duration. Show me." Vale tapped keys. A new graph appeared. Sine wave with irregular peaks. Ethan overlaid it mentally on the hurricane core pressure chart. Matched timestamps. Near perfect correlation. Each resonator energy spike matched a pressure surge in the hurricane core. Not a drop. A surge upward. "You see it?" Ethan pointed at the screen. "See what?" "Your machine isn't weakening the hurricane. It's rocking it." Vale frowned. "What are you talking about?" Ethan slid to the keyboard. Fingers flew, opening analysis programs. He loaded the data he'd just seen into an atmospheric dynamics model. "You calculated a static model." Ethan didn't look up. "But atmosphere is dynamic, nonlinear. Small sync disruption creates cascade effect." The program finished. Simulation appeared. Red hurricane spiral. Blue resonator pulses.
Each pulse deformed the core, compressed it. Then it expanded with greater force than before.
Fluctuation amplitude grew. Each cycle made the hurricane not weaker, but more chaotic. "Damn," Vale breathed. "You're not diffusing a bomb." Ethan turned to him. "You're shaking it. Every session makes the hurricane's path less predictable. You're not controlling it. You're turning an organized system into chaos." Vale stared at the screen. Face paled. "But rain falls. Ashford gets water." "Yes, you're dumping moisture, at the cost of destabilizing the whole system. Your great downpour." Ethan opened another program. Input 6-hour max power session parameters. Result froze him. "A 6-hour pulse rips the hurricane core," he said quietly. "But doesn't destroy it. Splits it into 3-4 smaller vortices, each with unpredictable paths. One hits Riverbend, another Ashford. Third goes opposite, or dissipates." Vale gripped his shoulder. "Look at probabilities. Chance they dissipate." Ethan eyed screen bottom numbers. Full dissipation probability, 23%. Smaller storms formation, 77%, of which 54% hit populated areas. "Not chance," Ethan said. "Roulette." "What if I stop the resonator now?" Vale's voice desperate. "No more interference?" Ethan switched models. Zero intervention. Natural hurricane evolution. Result seconds later. Path straight to Riverbend Valley. Impact 9 days. Damage estimate catastrophic. "Stop now. Hurricane follows original path." Ethan leaned back. Riverbend obliterated. Completely. "And if I continue?" "Chaos. You're playing with forces you don't understand. Each pulse increases unpredictability. End up with multiple smaller hurricanes hitting anywhere." Vale clutched his head. "So I've ruined everything." "You tried impossible." Ethan met his eyes. "Control a hurricane. Nature doesn't work that way. Can't tame it. Only observe and get out of path." "But I can't just—" "You can." Ethan stood. "Must." He grabbed the bag, pulled the crowbar, metal cold, heavy in hand. Vale's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Choosing lesser evil." Ethan headed for resonator control panel. "Continue. Chaos. Death. Stop. One predictable strike. Evacuate Riverbend. Can't evacuate chaos." "You don't understand." Vale blocked him. "Years invested. Everything I had. Last shot to prove." "To who?" Ethan stopped. "Your daughter? Academia? Yourself?" Vale flinched like struck. "You know nothing about me." "Know too much." Ethan held his gaze. "You see mission. I see data. Data says your mission kills people you're trying to save." He pushed Vale aside. Firm, not rough. Reached control panel. Found main power block. Thick cables ran to outside resonator. Raised crowbar. "Don't." Vale's voice hoarse. "Please." Ethan froze. Crowbar hung. One swing, one choice. Stop machine, doom Riverbend. Save Ashford from chaos. Let run, 23% dissipation chance. Or 77% disaster. 23 versus 77. Science versus hope. Ethan swung, hard, into control panel. Metal smashed plastic, electronics. Crackle. Sparks flew in tight space. Burnt insulation stench. Swing again. Again. Smashing circuits, crushing connections. Monitor died. Outside resonator hum cut with final groan. Silence crashed trailer. Ethan dropped crowbar. Clanged floor. Vale leaned wall, eyes shut, lips moved silently. "Now I warn them," Ethan said. 9 days to evacuate Riverbend. He turned, exited trailer into night. Ethan raced downhill. Branches whipped face, rocks slid boots. One thought: warn. Town square ahead. String lights lit crowd. 150. Nearly all Ashford, gathered celebrating, thanking Vale for miracle. Ethan burst square, opened mouth to shout warning. Cold drop hit forehead. Another. Cheek. Third. Hand. Crowd looked up. Hands reached sky. Rain fell. Real. Natural. No resonator. Hurricane link. Random front forecast 3 days ago. Normal fall shower, gone by morning. Crowd roared joy. "Miracle! Dr. Vale did it! Rain! Real rain!" Ethan center square, shouting over cheers. "Listen! Not Vale! Hurricane over Riverbend Valley! You must—" Voice drowned in rain, joy screams. Figure descended hill. Marcus Vale. Walked slow, heavy. Face pale, haggard. Crowd saw, rushed him. "Dr. Vale! You saved us! Thank you!" Hands reached, touched, supported, hugged. Vale didn't resist. Let crowd surround, lift. His gaze met Ethan's across square. No triumph in Vale's eyes, just exhaustion. Bitter understanding. Ethan grabbed nearest. Mike Dennis, auto shop owner. "Mike, listen. I stopped resonator because—" "You did what?" Mike pulled back. "Broke Dr. Vale's machine?" "Yes, but—" "He killed our miracle!" Crowd shout. "Heretic! Madman!" Circle widened around Ethan. Eyes held worse than anger. Revulsion. Pity. Contempt. Old Henderson pushed forward, rain-soaked face, tears mixed. "You tried steal our hope, Cole." Voice shook. "But God stronger. Sent rain despite your doubt." "Not God." Ethan choked, despair tight. "Weatherfront. Normal. Riverbend hurricane." "Shut up!" Woman scream. Mary Connors. "Shut up with science! We see miracle!" Ethan eyed crowd. Ecstatic faces. Vale carried like hero. Rain washing street dust. Not heart's lies. Mouth opened. Closed. Words powerless. Truth lost. Sheriff Thompson approached. Hand, shoulder. Not arresting. Calming. "Come on, Cole." Quiet. "Nothing for you here." Ethan let Sheriff lead to square edge. Away crowd. Cheers. Under old store awning. Rain drummed roof. Crowd sang. Thanked Vale. Thanked heavens. "You wanted rain." Sheriff eyed celebrating townsfolk. "Here it is." Ethan watched dark sky. Clouds brought town salvation. Him curse. Yes. Quiet. "Washed wrong dirt." Sheriff nodded. Silent. Stood awning. Watched Ashford celebrate miracle. 30 miles off, beyond ridge, invisible beast grew. Gained strength. Moved target. 9 days. 9 days evacuate valley. No one listened. Rain poured, washed dust, filled puddles, revived earth. Ethan Cole stood alone in rain, only seeing coming catastrophe. Only one, no one believed. Truth won his mind. Lost real world. Bitterest victory possible.